Those of you who are veteran viewers of my channel know that I occasionally cover topics regarding the border crisis, immigration, whether it's legal and or illegal, and especially the federal response to what is becoming an absolute disaster at the border. So early into the Biden administration, the president assigned the vice president, Kamala Harris, the task of seeking out and finding the root causes of the immigration crisis. This was kind of a big deal because it was a very complex situation and a complex problem handed over to a relatively inexperienced vice president when it came to international matters and foreign policy. And in that time, her role in that responsibility got conflated with the idea of solving the border crisis. Now, the administration now, and often has since, said that that was not her mandate, even though her actions and appearances in the time since then have tended to give doubt to that declaration, since she went to several Central American and South American countries and made statements to the populace such as, "Do not come," as in to the border. So if she wasn't there to solve the problem, why was she making moves like that? Either way, the efforts made to try to mitigate the border crisis have, to this point, effectively failed. And now they're trying something new, and I find it fascinating and worrying at the same time. So let's go through it. U.S. to set up migrant centers in Guatemala and Colombia to curb border arrivals when Title 42 orders end. Okay, now I believe they'll explain Title 42 in the article, and that's very important to this story, so let's continue. The United States will establish regional processing centers for migrants in Colombia and Guatemala in an effort to reduce arrivals at the southern border after a pandemic-era policy ends next month, Biden administration officials announced Thursday. The administration is also in talks with additional Latin American countries about the possibility of establishing more processing centers, said Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro N. Mayorkas. Several thousand migrants will be screened at the centers each month for eligibility under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and other humanitarian and labor pathways. At a news conference with Mayorkas, Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken said he expects many more people to stay near the regional centers and wait for their chance to seek legal protections. Okay, I'm going to read that one again just for those in the cheap seats. Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken said he expects many more people to stay near the regional centers and wait for their chance to seek legal protections. Blinken said Spain and Canada will accept referrals from the regional centers. Quote, "Migration is the definition of a challenge that no country can solve alone," he said, unquote. Or unquote, he said. The announcement comes 2 weeks ahead of the expected end of Title 42 orders, which were implemented amid the COVID-19 pandemic and prevented migrants from requesting asylum, allowing border agents to return many of them swiftly back to Mexico. Migrants have been expelled from the U.S. nearly 2.8 million times under Title 42 since March of 2020. When Title 42 orders are lifted on May 11th, immigration agents will return to processing people under the long-standing authority of Title 8. Deportations under Title 8 carry stiffer consequences, including potential criminal prosecution and a ban on re-entry for at least 5 years. The Department of Homeland Security will significantly expand the use of expedited removal to process migrants' claims for relief and deport those who do not qualify within days or a few weeks, Mayorkas said. Asylum officers and immigration judges are being sent to the border to speed up proceedings. Okay, so before I continue, just want to make sure I got this straight. All right, so right now, Title 42 effectively prevents people from coming across the border seeking asylum. They have to wait on the other side of the border while they're being processed. They can't come into America and be housed and detained and so on and so forth. And they'll be deported if they try to, right, back to Mexico. All right, but that's going to end soon, and then we'll return back to the, I guess, classic processing. So once Title 42 ends, where you have people camped out along the border waiting to be processed, what are we doing again? I'll come back to that. Just hold on a second. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has added phone booths and privacy booths to border facilities to aid attorney calls and asylum screenings, a practice first implemented by then-President Trump and suspended by President Biden. That's interesting. Why would you do that? Migrants can be held in CBP custody for only 3 days, and screenings currently take place within weeks after they leave. Deportation flights will double or triple for certain countries, officials said. That includes flights to Cuba, which resumed this week after a pause since 2020. Homeland Security officials said the Cuban government agreed to not retaliate against deportees and that embassy officials in Havana are monitoring for compliance. Well, now, isn't that assuring? If I fled my oppressive country because of arguments or exceptions to the government, and now I'm being returned, Cuba promises not to retaliate. Great. That sounds great. Mayorkas said the agency has expanded detention capacity for single adults and will use digital monitoring methods for adults and families, including GPS ankle monitors, curfews, and check-ins. This week, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials said they are piloting a new form of GPS monitoring, a wristwatch. Well, how very Dick Tracy of them, that will be tested on 50 migrants in Denver for the next month before officials decide whether to expand its use. About 255,000 of the 5 million people in deportation proceedings. I'm going to read that again. About 255,000 of the 5 million people in deportation proceedings are monitored through the agency's Alternatives to Detention program. Sounds very restorative justice. 5 million. The Department of Homeland Security has given $135 million to border communities for shelter, food, and transportation of migrants this fiscal year, and will award an additional $290 million in the coming weeks, officials said. Award an additional $290 million. I don't think it's an award. You're having to supplement our lack of ability to handle all these incoming people by sending them to independent communities along the border. I wonder if they'll bring up El Paso in this story, because El Paso has had a very, very hard time of late when it comes to dealing with as many incoming migrants as they have had. The agency expects a rise in arrivals, with projections showing as many as 13,000 apprehensions of migrants per day after May 11th. 13,000 apprehensions per day. Okay, how many border security officers do we have working right now? 13,000 a day. Mexico will continue accepting up to 30,000 deported migrants after the use of Title 42 ends, Mayorkas said. His department will also establish a family reunification program for people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Colombia, Mayorkas said, as well as update existing reunification programs for people from Cuba and Haiti. Those programs allow people with family-based green card petitions to enter the U.S. under temporary humanitarian parole while they wait for those applications to be processed and immigrant visas to become available. Officials said the migrant processing centers in Guatemala and Colombia will be run by, quote, international partners, unquote, aided by U.S. personnel. Okay, migrants will be able to make an appointment by phone to visit the nearest center before traveling. Administration officials are working to finalize by May 11th a new rule that would make migrants ineligible for asylum if they enter the U.S. without permission and fail to apply for protection in another country on the way. Well, that wasn't already a rule? Okay, no. Okay, that's good, I guess. Under the plan, some could still request asylum at an official port of entry, but would largely be required to do so using CBP One, a phone application that migrants complain has been riddled with technical glitches and offers limited appointments that fill up within minutes. So there's an app for that. If you want to get into the country, there's an app for that. Mayorkas said his department will expand available appointments through CBP One after the Title 42 policy expires. Quote, "Let me be clear, our border is not open and will not open after May 11th, he said. Yeah, well, tell that to the incoming influx of 13,000 contacts a day. Define open, I guess. Citizens of Venezuela, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Cuba can apply for temporary lawful entry to the U.S. if they have a financial sponsor, as long as they do not cross the Panama, Mexico, or U.S. land borders without authorization. I mean, that's setting up a whole bunch of extra legal hoops to jump through. But then if someone is intent on getting to the border and across it illegally, I don't know what that's going to do. Mayorkas said Thursday that migrants from those countries who are interdicted at sea will become ineligible for the lawful entry program. All right, so people trying to float their way around the borders, which is always a safe proposition. Yeah, so effectively you're going to force people to take other routes to try to get to the same goal, because a lot of people are not going to be able to either qualify for or attain authorization for these border crossings. And if they're willing to cross one border illegally, they're going to cross all of them illegally. And if that becomes difficult, then yeah, you're going to see a lot of people trying to float their way around these countries to get to a place where they can then get off onto land and head to the border. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me just say this as a caveat. I do not have an answer to this problem. I just foresee that this is going to cause more problems, or at the very least, not solve the current problem. Federal officials say the measures to offset record arrivals of migrants at the southern border, pointing to a 95% decline in encounters of people from those four countries between ports of entry. 95% decline in encounters? Then why is it going to go up by 13,000 every day come May 11th? What? But 20 Republican-led states asked a federal judge to strike down the sponsorship program, arguing that the Department of Homeland Security exceeded its authority. Well, did DHS exceed its authority? Are you going to tell us, Los Angeles Times? Okay. Immigrant advocates expressed support for the migrant processing centers and family reunification programs, but criticized the fast-tracked asylum interviews, which they said would fuel wrongful deportations. Human Rights First has tracked more than 13,480 reports of violent attacks on migrants languishing in or expelled to Mexico, including killings, kidnappings, and rapes since Biden took office. Okay, so let's think about this again for a second, right? Title 42 effectively keeps people out of the U.S. while they're being processed or in delays towards their being processed for asylum and so on. And this has formed effectively little immigrant shanty towns along the border of Mexico with the United States. And as a result of that, you've got killings, kidnappings, violence, rape, probably theft, right? People being taken advantage of because they're outside of their home country, they have no resources, and they're desperate. So, when Title 42 ends, we can't do that anymore. So what are we doing instead? And by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, because the mechanisms sound exactly the same. We're going to move the border in pieces into processing centers within the countries of origination, where the people trying to make use of these processing centers are going to have to wait nearby to them while they're being processed. So, again, let's think about this for a second. You're going to force people in countries where their situations are already desperate, either because of economic hardship, or political or religious or social oppression, or because they're being threatened by non-governmental entities such as gangs and or cartels. You're going to give people in these countries, in those situations, the opportunity to show their faces at processing centers that are there explicitly for the purpose of people trying to get out of the country for one reason or another. So, if I'm trying to get out of an oppressive, violent, dangerous situation from people that seek to do me harm in one way or another, my best bet is to go to a known, fixed location where people such as me can be expected to be found within that same country. I'm not risking being identified or followed or attacked in some way for effectively announcing that I'm going to try to get out of here. Okay. And then consequently that as well, you're not going to have shanty towns similar to the ones building up around the Mexico border happening at these processing centers. Imagine if you were, just for the sake of argument, a human smuggler, and you were looking for a customer base. Well, gosh, here's all these people languishing outside of these locally managed processing centers who are trying to get out of the country. Well, I mean, they could go through all the hoops of trying to get through the paperwork and the checks and the verifications and the different border authorizations, or, hey, I can offer you an easy way for a lot less money and a lot less time. Come with me. Is it just me, or are they just basically making Title 42 camps in Guatemala and Colombia to start with? Yeah, Title 42 camps. That's what it sounds like to me. They have to end the policy in America, but they're just going to create little islands of it in these other countries in order to stem the tide. And not only that, but I just think about it for a second. If I'm a sovereign country, right, and I have another country establishing mini embassies that are specifically there to help my citizens escape this country, that seems like a bit of an ego bruise, wouldn't it? That seems really odd to me. I really wonder, and I don't know if the article will say, it hasn't said so far, so I'm guessing probably not. Has this kind of experiment been tried before? And if so, what were the results? Because I don't know that this is going to solve the border problem instead of just adding more layers of problems to people's lives otherwise. Well, let's see. The International Refugee Assistance Project pointed to steep backlogs and long processing times for refugee admissions. You don't say. When you've got millions of people in process, how many judges, how many officials? Quote, expanding family reunification parole pathways and refugee processing for displaced people in the Americas is long overdue, but we cannot ignore that the Biden administration is proposing a Faustian bargain by simultaneously seeking into... Let's try that again. Quote, expanding family reunification parole pathways and refugee processing for displaced people in the Americas is long overdue, but we cannot ignore that the Biden administration is proposing a Faustian bargain by simultaneously seeking to implement a Trump-era asylum ban at the U.S.-Mexico border, effectively slamming the door shut on countless others in need, unquote, the project's policy director Sunil Varghese said in a statement. Simultaneously seeking to implement a Trump-era asylum ban, they're... what? I must have missed something here, because I thought the Trump ban was lifting. Title 42 was lifting. I must have missed a step somewhere in here. Homeland Security officials have been planning for the end of Title 42 orders for the last year. The agency has 24,000 agents along the border and plans to hire 300 more. Wait, 24,000? So they're anticipating 13,000 contacts or arrests or apprehensions a day after May 11th. And right now they have 24,000 onwards to 24,300 agents along the border. Along one of the longest contiguous borders on the planet, 24,000 agents up against 13,000 a day. I mean, and I think that's 13,000 additional to whatever was happening before. Holy cats. Last week, the U.S., along with the governments of Panama and Colombia, launched a 60-day campaign to halt migration through the dangerous Darien Gap, a dense jungle controlled by gangs that nearly 90,000 migrants have traveled through in the first 3 months of this year alone. So 30,000 people a month trying to make their way through a dangerous jungle controlled by gangs. Holy cats. All right, well, let's review, shall we? We're about to establish forward operating bases of our own border into foreign countries to help process people to try to head off the tide of people trying to make it to our border. They can instead be processed in country ahead of, I guess, being given travel accommodations to come to the border or come to America. Okay, and it's expected that the people trying to be processed at these centers will have to wait outside for some indeterminate amount of time in order to be processed. And these processing centers are going to be manned by U.S. personnel and, quote, international partners. Okay, so just so I get this, and again, just to review, we're going to set up little pockets of our own border in foreign countries that are there to process people trying to escape those countries. Countries that are corrupt, countries that are destitute, countries that are rife with gangs and or cartel activity, to try to stem the tide of people coming to our border. And as a consequence of this, there's going to be little campgrounds, shanty towns built up around these centers of people hoping to get processed, but in the meantime are putting their safety and their very lives at risk at either being taken advantage of by people in the camps or criminals around the area or smugglers or maybe even government officials looking for dissidents they can pluck out of the crowd. And then the other barriers that are being put up between different countries and their borders are probably going to force, or at least influence a lot of people to attempt dangerous water travel around borders, and we've seen how that's gone in a lot of cases. I don't know. This sounds so weird and convoluted and bizarre to me. And again, if there's been an attempt at this same kind of process in the past somewhere else, I'd be very curious to know what were the results. How is this all going to work as far as jurisdiction, security, travel? Is this really going to stem the tide? I guess we'll find out. Anyway, that's it for me. Let me know what you thought about this policy and this article in the comments below, and what you thought about the video in general. I appreciate your feedback. Also, leave a like if you liked it, or a dislike if you didn't. If you'd like to hear more from me, I'm here every Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for TED Excellence, where I take a look at off-brand TED Talks. And then Sunday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern for the Sunday Stream, where I talk about a thing. I've already got a subject picked out for this week, but usually I pick it out on Saturdays, so there you go. Follow me on Twitter, scribe_light. And with that, everyone, thank you for joining me. I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.